Oh, we're going live. And hello, everyone. Welcome to the second talk in the pink track today. And one short note to all of the listeners that the most active participants in the Q&A section will win an ebook from our sponsor, Stacked. So use the Q&A function, ask Roman any questions that you have, preferably about his talk. Maybe you can ask some other things. And now I would like to introduce Roman Nedzelsky from Czechia, who will talk about automated testing using Azure DevOps. So, Roman, the floor is yours.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Paulius. Let me share my presentation. Okay, so again, my name is Roman Nedzelsky. I'm actually working with developers in DHL IT services in Prague. And what I would like to cover this session is really the fundamentals around automated testing using Azure DevOps. Well, it's all about the Microsoft stack and Microsoft environment, so we will cover just that part. But I think that also it's interesting as well. To start with the topic, I think that it's really important to repeat again, like what is the DevOps approach, because well, we will talk about Microsoft DevOps environment. So DevOps, in really simple principle, is more constructive cooperation of developers and operation teams. I think that everyone who is, let's say, leading, for example, the team of developers needs to know that actually that there is always this ops part where actually things should switch to production, or maybe even to UAT and then to production. So this is all about the improvement of collaboration and productivity as well, because of course these two parts needs to cooperate somehow, right? Well, you need to switch the whole thing to production somehow with actually a minimum downtime and some continuous deployment as well. Second thing is actually that this is the second bullet, continuous measuring of the upper performance. Also, if we are talking about some continuous delivery and continuous improvement of some product, it is also important to be able to continuously measure the whole thing, the whole performance of the application, which can be done, for example, via automated testing. So if we will talk about Azure DevOps, Azure DevOps is a stack of application from Microsoft hosted in Azure environment, and it can cover, let's say, the whole life cycle of software development. So if you will start with some agile planning and Azure boards, we can talk about the Kanban charts. We can talk about the creation of the user stories, bug test cases as well, all around actually the planning and managing of the development lifecycle. If we will talk about the repositories, well, Azure provides, or Azure DevOps provides, the capability of having a versioning system in one place as well. So you can select most common GitHub or most common Git repository can be hosted in this Azure environment as well. Well, if you have all the user stories and code in one place, definitely there is a possibility to orchestrate things a little bit. So we can use Azure pipelines, which is I think one of the most crucial parts of the Azure DevOps environment, where actually you can use a lot of connectors, really huge amount of connectors to different systems, different actually other products, Jenkins, Selenium, or just the REST API calls, or for example PowerShell execution in the Azure environment itself, or somewhere in on-premise using, for example, hosted agents which are installed on a local servers or virtual servers in your environment. Then actually there is another part after the pipelines, which is let's say related to the testing, so Azure tests, and we will talk mainly about this specific part where you can execute, let's say, or where you can do a manual testing as well as the automated one. The last portion is Microsoft artifacts, which can serve there as a let's say space for possible reusable parts of a code which can be reused again and again and again in different projects. So if If we will move on the next slide, I talked about possibilities to use a multiple, let's say, different connectors or systems inside the Azure DevOps. It's really not just about the thing that we are just using Microsoft Azure, so few Microsoft products, and that's it. Microsoft is really well known that in the last years they provide like I think over the 500 connectors in the different systems, but still there are just the connectors which can be reused across the whole, let's say, Office 365 stack as well as, for example, Azure stack as well. So as you can see, uh, these are just examples of what can be used in the different parts of the DevOps approach lifecycle. So you can use Microsoft Project, for example, for planning and connecting to the, let's say, Azure DevOps. You can use Slack for communications. You can use connectors to Microsoft Teams or Trello or something else to communicate and do all the stuff. In a build part, you can use Git, you can use Eclipse, you can use Docker connectors. All these can be used there. Well, when you are trying to orchestrate something, I think this is really important that you can include all of these connectors into some orchestration workflow, so you can in the end, I don't know, as a part of deployment, for example, or release, or just the testing, you can create really, let's say, a new instance in Docker, or you can use Kubernetes for orchestration. You can use all the connectors to different systems, which is, I think, most awesome things. Also related to testing, which we will talk about. And as you can see, there are connectors to Jenkins, JUnit, JMeter, TeamCity, Selenium as well. So again, actually, you can, for example, if you are not, let's say, happy to store your code in the Microsoft stack, in Microsoft DevOps, you can use your on-premise Git repository, or you can use some other tool, and you can just, as a part of the workflow, get the whole code, test it, for example, and put it into the production using your Azure pipelines. I think that this is actually the most actually nice, most nice part of the whole thing, that you are not just sticked with one product, but you can use what you are using at the moment and just extend the whole usability with some CI/CD integration of the whole thing. Yeah. Now, actually, well, the question is actually if you test or not to test, because from my personal experience, like before DHL, a lot of companies are really, let's say, testing. They are not really, let's say, doing the test cases or regular test scenarios, or not using Selenium at all, but they are just doing some, let's say, technical tests, maybe user acceptance test as well. So what does that mean? Actually, that developers will just check their code, or maybe the senior ones are checking the code after the junior ones. And maybe actually, there's some session with a customer where actually you will prepare some so-called happy paths to a customer. Customer will just test the application, and that's it actually. So it's, well, always let's say, a question mark. On another side, I think that it's a real, let's say, major part of the development of each application, and it can, let's say, save a lot of money, because if the problems are, just actually correct, or actually fixed in some, let's say, regular stage, it's always better than, well, if you will deal with a huge amount of defects in a production environment or somewhere close to production environment. A question is always like, who will create test cases, who will collect and analyze the feedbacks, if there can be some automation, and what are the pros and cons, and actually what is the general pros and cons of testing. Well, who will create test cases? It's always a question. I think that test cases should be created by developers, maybe with the help of business analysts, who is receiving the requirements in the beginning from the customers. However, I think that developers are the main part of actually who should create the test cases. Who would collect and analyze the feedback? Well, ideally automatically, if we have some automation. If not, then, well, I guess that some operation person admin, can be business analyst as well. About the automation and the human effort, I think that this is pretty clear. There are bunch of things, and we will go through that, like what can be automated. General thing, I think that, well, it should be automated as many other things. And it's better to test smaller chunks instead of testing one huge outcome. I think that definitely we are talking about smaller chunks, and that they are better to test them. Simple reason actually, because if you have continuous delivery and continuous deployment in a place, then you are dealing really with let's say small, and you can have connected that to even agile methodology or Scrum, that you are dealing really with a small chunk, with a small updates, small actual releases to production, really regularly, for example, each 14 days, each month, each week. It depends on the product and on the size of a development. So, but definitely smaller chunks should be definitely better instead of one huge outcome, right? I think that no one wants to deal with one huge, totally broken outcome. It's always a disaster. Now, what to test actually? What should you test in your application? Well, in the first place, functionality, definitely, right? So, well, I think that, well, if the application is function or not, or whenever the function application is functional or not. Second thing is actually you should really definitely test the UI if there is something. So some forms, for example, some portal, whatever is there actually as UI. There is a one nice question actually, how and if you should test, for example, also the reporting, if there is something like, I don't know, Power BI, Tableau, or some different platform. You should definitely test the security. That's for sure, I think. Some penetration testing should be done, or some maybe code quality review using SonarQube, or maybe some Fortify scan. There are plenty of them. Compliance is definitely the next topic as well, because well, I think that there are a bunch of tools at the moment, really, let's say, which can help you with let's say testing of compliance. And it's definitely a crucial topic if you are dealing with a development for, let's say, maybe even more countries, applications which will be used in more countries. Well, in my case, we are really, let's say, common dealing with applications which are developed for Germany. Well, it can be really, let's say, super compliant, has to be really super compliant. And the last thing actually what to test is performance of the application, right? So definitely actually like the response, delays, well, everything around that actually definitely if the application is hosted just in one country, like what will be the performance of the application in totally different part of the world. Again, I think that one situation can be if you will host your application in Malaysia, for example, but you need to provide this application to actually Europe as well as to, for example, Costa Rica or other regions. So that's different. That's definitely a huge topic. Uh, Definitely, if you are talking, for example, about supporting some sort of service desk, for example, or you know some applications which has to be really fast and which are in relatively direct touch with the customers, with end users. Now, which sort of testing, which other tests we can talk about actually? Well, this is a matrix of different tests. You can see that there are plenty of them: story tests, prototypes, simulations, usability testing, user acceptance testing, alpha, beta, unit tests, of course, component tests, system integration tests, performance tests, a lot of things. Not mandatory to do all of them, of course, but it's definitely good to think that you will cover each, let's say, quadrant of this metrics. So you will be somehow covered with some sort of testing from which are actually business facing, which are critical for product, which are technology facing, also which are supporting the team as well, because you can predict a lot of potential issues. And well, also from a capacity perspective and capacity planning, you can predict a lot of things which will needs to happen in the near future from the product development perspective. Now to the manual tests. Well, in manual test, actually, there is a human tester, right, who is testing the system based on some test script. In our case, actually, when we are talking about the Microsoft stack, you can easily create a test case in devazure.com. You can create a relationships to this case with user stories, which you have currently in your Kanban, in your Azure boards. And you can run the scenarios and select what went well and what not. In a real case, actually, there is really, let's say, the example. There is a relative side window when you have all the tasks, all the steps which you will write down into this test case, and you are really clicking on let's say green check or red flag that it's not working. Uh, this is again actually just a repetition of the thing. What is the difference between manual and automated testing? In a manual thing, manual approach, there is one actually human person who is interacting with the system, who is obtaining the results, and who is actually driven by some test script. The thing is actually that this is, let's say this serial approach. When the person is doing one script, then another, then another, then another, imagine that actually some testers should test a huge bunch of servers, really, let's say, tough application, and do a lot of tests and provide some report to audience like almost immediately. Almost impossible, right? This report definitely is not in the game. Actually, tester is just clicking and doing some outcomes to a test script. Now, if we will switch to manual testing to automated testing, actually the test script is actually replaced by a test code, because of course you have to develop the whole automation of the testing. It can be real, let's say, piece of code in Visual Studio. It can be also some, let's say, testing scenario in Selenium or in other UI testing application. It can be even some usability of RPA. It can be, I don't know, PowerShell scripts, for example. It can be, let's say, different bunch of things. For example, in Python, if you are testing data science approach, I think that you will definitely use Python, maybe PowerShell as well in this case. So really, let's say, a huge amount of things, but definitely a test code. And well, the human was replaced by a machine. It's like a scenario from Terminator or something, but it's like that. Actually, we are trying to replace a human activity in this case, um, which can really, let's say, do a lot of stuff together immediately. Almost, it's really fast. So uh, another thing now, to the manual testing. As I said before, in this case we have one test suite created in Azure DevOps. You can put there as much different test cases as possible. You can then click on run test, and if you will click on that, and if these cases are really, let's say, non-automatic, non-automated, then a new pop-up window will actually show you the list of all the tasks in the test case, and you can go one by one, do the activity, and in the end say that if it is correct or not. As I said as well, you can do, let's say, immediately in Azure boards all the activities. So you can, let's say, click on each use case in your Azure boards on just on the three dots, and you can immediately create let's say, quick test cases to each user story which you have in your place. So you can really do that really immediately. You can quickly assign the testers from the group, pre-created group of testers, and that's it. Actually, testers can then actually maybe describe the story a little bit more. They can connect it also to a code in a repository, or for example to artifacts or to releases as well, to sprints as well. So this can be done really easily actually. So from manual testing possibility, this is definitely a nice and smooth way. I think that it's also important to talk about the parameters, because when you are talking in about actually the test cases, then just imagine what should be written there, like, well, login or open the URL, portal.azure.com, for example. Sign with username, test user one, use password, and that's it actually. So I think that it would be good maybe to generalize these things a little bit and use parameters instead of the direct usernames and passwords. These can be written down below each test case. Also, actually, there can be more than one username, more than one password. So, for example, it can be, the test task should be, for example, just log in with at username, and well, there can be a bunch of usernames possible for testing with different roles, for example, with different passwords. So it can be, I don't know, like test user 1, 2, 3, 4, test admin 1, 2, 3, 4, test stakeholder 1, 2, 3, 4, with different passwords and with different roles, which will be preset in the application. So you can even test, of course, all the testing scenarios. Now about the automation. Well, I think that actually really more four important points. The fourth one is of course like automate everything else if needed. But what should be definitely automated from my perspective, it's a code testing, it's workflows, it's infrastructure. These three things I think are really like, well, not always that easy, but I think that in general it's easy to automate in general these things. So about the code testing, we are talking about that, right? So we can always, let's say, include or create or develop Azure pipeline or CI/CD pipeline, where we can differ between build and release, and where we can do a bunch of different activities in each case, actually. So we can actually create, for example, new instance in a Docker. We can get the code from the Git or from other system. We can apply some testing, automated testing on that piece of code. For example, we can use SonarQube. We can use our own, let's say, predefined code in Visual Studio. We can use Selenium. We can use other, let's say, RPA tools, for example. So we can do this code testing. We can automate the workflows because we can automate, really, let's say, the whole deployment of the machine to the testing environment, for example, or to multiple testing environments. We can also actually automate the part when we are actually, let's say, releasing the code into the production. So again, for example, we can connect to on-premise installed agents, or we can use Azure or AWS or other infrastructure platform for implementing or deploying this piece of code. We can automate the whole infrastructure creation, so we can create, let's say, new virtual machines, for example, and not just the instance on Docker or something in the Azure or in AWS, in Google, somewhere. So we can automate the infrastructure as well, which is, I think, yeah, really, it can be done really quickly. Now, why automation? Actually, well, the thing is that actually execution of automated tests is really fast. Actually, it can be really easily repeatable. Yeah, also actually that, well, these tests can run continuously. Well, just imagine that you will really have actually, I don't know, 1 week or 14 days sprint, and you will need to actually do the testing in the end of each sprint, and you need to actually release the test to production each end of the sprint. So you really need to test as smoothly and as continuously as possible, right? Also, the lower cost based on area fixing of the defects. I know that this sounds really, let's say, yeah, well, okay, maybe yes, maybe no, but just really, let's say, try to write down all the effort, all the hours, all the cooperation needed, all the capacity which needs to be rescheduled, just actually because all the defects came in a one status at time, at one point in time, in the end, actually, of the whole, I don't know, release to production. And do the same thing actually when you will really be fixing the issues based on some continuous testing each week or each 14 days. I think that definitely from a security perspective, for example, I think that this can bring a lot of time to fix some potential defects, because it can be actually spread it throughout the whole application, not just the one part. So you will need to redo or redevelop a lot of lines of code, not just some small fixes. So as you can see, actually, based on continuous integration, delivery, and deployment, this is actually below the text. There's one smooth or one small flow: code repository, build system, test framework, release, and deploy. This is the thing, how things should be automated, or scenario how things should be automated, actually how everything should work together. And why automation? Well, because really, let's say there is just no space for manual testing in continuous delivery. Just imagine that you will allocate someone and you will count with that person in the actually end of each potential release to production. It's unimaginable. I don't know how for you, for me, definitely. Uh, Let's talk about test automation strategy. I think that this is a good thing as well. It's about what test brings. That test brings real value. One time green, one time red. This is the thing how you should think about them. Actually, that if there are some tests planned, uh, I knew this actually from my own from personal experience, to be honest, because we planned some tests, and I know that really, let's say, the automated test was in place in Azure DevOps. We run the test, and if you will run the test one time, it ends up with everything green, passed, everything is good, everything is smooth. Then you will run the test again, and you will end up with a red, for example, flag in somewhere actually. And we spent a lot of hours on realizing like what the heck is going on, like why one time the red test is actually ends up with a green pass status, and one time in an error status or with an error status. And it can be different reasons. It can be security, it can be networking, it can be a lot of stuff. But it's really, let's say, always good to realize that these actually two valued tests will not brings any real value in the beginning, because real, let's say, what does this say to you? Like nothing, right? Like, well, one time green, one time red. Well, what's the result? Also, actually, it's really important to think that every new test should be really reliable, reliable and fast. Apologize, and fast. Really important for me is the last number, fast. Actually, if the test will brings you too much time, it's really irrelevant to do it. It's really, let's say, easier to do bunch of tests instead of one huge super complex test where you will potentially troubleshoot and debug a lot of stuff. It's really irrelevant, I think. Yeah. So automated testing. Well, from the UI perspective, I think it's pretty clear. Well, Selenium scripts for web applications mainly. Appium scripts, for example, for desktop applications. It can be It can be added as a new actually tasks in a job, which is let's say managing the releasing to production or to testing environment automatically. So new tasks in a workflow. API and web service testing, Postman, Newman, MS Test, for example, bunch of things which can be put in there. I think that another really important thing is regression testing. So again, in deployment automation, verify environment stability, application integration test, for example, infrastructure testing. It's I think super important, the last piece. If you are hosting your infrastructure in Azure, I always have a bunch of, let's say, questions from the customer like, well, we just created something. Is it good? Is it bad? What is it about the plan? Like, which plan should I select in the storage account? Which plan should I select somewhere else in a data lake, or I don't know, somewhere in a Docker, for example? It's always like about the correct setup, so correct pricing and scale as well in the end, right? Definitely in the case of Azure. So I think that infrastructure testing is also a good idea to include into the testing stuff. Uh, Schedule testing, nice. So I think another opportunity to have relatively scheduled test builds and artifacts. If for example, we are talking about security tests, baseline tests, and snapshots of the current environment as well. Really important as well, the last one, I guess, because well, if you will just schedule it, then it's a done deal. Everything is automated, so you can just enjoy the fun instead of doing everything, well, let's say, tightly automated. About the security tests, I mention again, well, three another small topics, which is authentication, validation, authorization policies, and throttling. I think that these are not that common uh, in some cases, but they definitely should be. Definitely about the authentication, or sorry, authorization policies. I think that this is definitely the huge topic in all the corporates. And well, I think it's really underestimated a little bit because, well, the thing is that policies are really changing. It's why these are policies, and they has to react on some, let's say, threats and everything around us. And I think actually that the authorization policies, well, should be checked really regular, to be honest, because if you are counting with your common practice from the past, it shouldn't be it well it not has to be the case even now, actually, when you are doing the development, right, or releasing. So actually these things should be definitely tested as well. Throttling, yeah, with connection of some with some reporting, definitely as well, can provide you really valuable information about what is happening, and what should happen differently, for example. So that's definitely a good thing as well. Well, we have a data validation because I think that this is also important topic. Again, if you are connecting bunch of things in your application together, you are doing some, let's say, almost integration hub, for example. When you are really, let's say, collecting a lot of stuff together, you are doing maybe some data migration. Partially, you are dealing with the data quality as well, especially in some, I don't know, financial or personal data. Then you should check your data validation as well. I think that it's always good to let's say include it into the testing as well, instead of trying to deal with that after the release to production, or after some really important milestone, something you really don't want to. So I think that this is also a really important thing to deal with. uh, Dependency test. Um, I think that actually for all of you actually who is dealing with hosting of your virtual machines or environment or services in the Azure or somewhere in the cloud, I think that you know what I'm talking about. If I'm talking about health checks and regression tests as well. For me, for example, the health checks are really important because when, for example, I'm dealing with some high availability critical application, and well, I need to deal a lot with some failovering in a, let's say, geo region point of view. It's really, I think, important to check what is the health of different parts of the deployment environment in the end. If everything is running smoothly, maybe select the specific environment for the specific countries as well. It's really important to talk, or sorry, to check that as well. So dependency tests. If for example, well, another story can be, for example, if you are combining multiple services from multiple vendors together, it's also good to talk about the dependencies or dependency tests. Uh, yeah, in my case, can be Microsoft, Google, and something else together uh, in different locations. So it will be good to check if, for example, in all of these locations are the same results or is the same performance. Now, automated tests using release pipelines. This is something what I already talked about, and as you can see, well, you can really modify your pipelines. You can create a new stage. You can select tests, for example, performance from Azure, or automated from Test Manager. You can put tasks to any kind of stage, you can put a lot of things to the pipeline. So you can select I don't know, from all the connectors which we talked about in the beginning of the presentation. You can include then Jenkins, GitHub, Selenium, other stuff as well, based on your preferences. And actually, if you will just test the thing, uh, you can see the report, which is here in the middle of the slide. You can see the report of the outcomes of the application. Now, as I said, well, really common thing for testing is Selenium. Really common product for testing is Selenium. So, just example that Selenium can be really super easily integrated in the whole environment. And you can include all of your stuff based, of course, on the dev or UAT environments. It can have different pipelines for each environment. It can have, let's say, different one for dev, UAT, or production. So it's really easy to do that stuff. You can use agent installation. You can after that do a CI/CD pipeline config, and that's it actually. So in the end, it's running like that in a console window, and it's doing all the stuff which are needed from on the virtual environment in most cases. I'm always saying that actually some automation or product is nothing without some reporting. So I just put here a slide with actually reporting. In this case, it's like Courage Reports, and it's a free add-on for Azure DevOps report generator, which can be used. There are a bunch of other things which can be used as well, of course, Power BI, Tableau, whatever else, which I can easily connect to Azure DevOps. I know even the people who are using, for example, Excel and doing own stuff on tables. But it's just example. There is a whole marketplace in Azure, and you can select a lot of things from the marketplace itself. So this is just the example what can be used and done as an outcome of the testing. And maybe one thing, my last slide is something which is called Azure DevOps Demo Generator. I don't know if someone knows this let's say product, this project or not, but you can easily create. I think it's really good, let's say, starting point for playing with Azure DevOps. It's really the generator of data. If you will just put Azure DevOps Demo Generator into Google, it will immediately shows you the first link, and this is it. Actually, you can easily select the project name, select some, let's say, predefined organization from your current DevOps environment. If you don't have any, Azure DevOps is for free for 5 users, I think. So it can be easily created. And after that, you can just select a template. I think that this is a major, let's say, advantage of this project, because in a template, you have really, I think, bunch of templates, maybe 30, 40, something like that, from different areas, also connected to Microsoft Learn, if you are a fan of learning from Microsoft side. So you can easily, let's say, create this template to this environment. It brings you, I don't know, like 5 minutes, for example, and it's done. You can play with all the stuff in this Azure DevOps instance or project. There are actually pre-made pipelines, pre-made user stories, pre-made test cases, pre-made configurations. You can after that configure the let's say predefined connectors, and you can connect them to your real environment, like real Azure, for example. If you will select, I don't know, some website project, you can connect them to your Azure subscription, and you can really, let's say, deploy some, let's say, demo website and things like that. So you can play with that a lot, and you can test a lot of actually scenarios which we talked about from the automations perspective, also from, let's say, other parts of Azure DevOps like Kanban, the whole agile thing, yeah, things like that. So this is definitely, I think, good way to start Okay, and in my last slide, there are just resources which I used for the presentation. So if you would well, you can just try to click on any of them, and you can learn a little bit more from the presentation. Yeah, from the presentation content. And that's it from my side. So, any questions?
Thank you, Roman, for your presentation. I'll be honest, I didn't know what Azure DevOps was, and now you introduced me, and now I know. So we do have several questions in the Q&A section. First one is from Justina. Her question is automation part included in test plans of standard package? I guess this is
Automation
about...
part. Thinking is automation part included in test plans of standard packet? Yes, actually, you can. It's a good question. Thank you for that. I forgot to mention that. There are two actually ways, even without connectors, of testing. Of course, the first one is the manual one, which I mentioned. The second one is automated as well. So you can also select the automated testing. The only thing is that you need to write them yourself in a Visual Studio and connect them with this Azure DevOps part. But it is like a standard part. You don't need to install anything else.
Okay, thank you. And there is another question from Ivan. His question is, do you have successful experience in using flaky test management in Azure?
Yeah, well, it's a really nice and really well-pointed question. No, I don't have a successful experience of using flaky test management in Azure. I have a negative one at the moment, and we are still dealing with actually this part in my company. So, well, I don't have an easy workaround or easy actually recommendation like how and like what should be used, because I don't have the positive reaction or a good reaction.
Okay. There is another question from Dimitri. He's asking, what additional widgets or plugins are you using in your automation testing over Basic Pack in Azure DevOps, and for what tasks?
Yeah, I'm definitely using a Docker Kubernetes, and I think also Power BI related widgets in my personal environment. The thing is that we are dealing a lot with BI stuff, so we need to try to test somehow the Power BI reporting. This is what we are doing at the moment and what we are trying to develop. Also, actually, we are using a lot of stuff using Docker and using also OpenShift. So another two widgets, and we are also using a lot Jenkins and Git, because in my case, as I'm from corporate, even though my team personally is using DevOps also for storing a code, we need to have all the code also in on-premise environment as well, in on-premise Git. So we are mirroring the code into the Git as well using pipelines. Yeah, so that's it.
Okay, and the last question that I see in Q&A section is from Justina again, and she's asking, is there any way in test plans to deal with two variables? For example, one variable is a device and another is a color like green, yellow, etc.
Yes, absolutely. I will just quickly maybe switch to the slide where I had this. It was here, sorry. Here, yeah. So these parameters actually in each testing, in each actually test case or these test task, actually, there are variables. And in my case, it's just actually about the username and it's just about the password. But you can actually select here all the parameters you would like to. For example, as you mentioned, actually, it can be device, it can be color, it can be computer, it can be whatever else, actually. So this is definitely doable in this section. Yeah. So I have a link which is describing details, but it's called parameters in test section. And yes, the question is yes, you can use that.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for this answer. And we're actually out of time. and I see that we covered all questions. So thank you, Roman. I've actually already Googled Azure DevOps demo generator, and I will look at it because this seems interesting. So you have at least one person who you're interested in it. Okay.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you very much, everyone, for attending the session. I hope that it brings you some overview about their Microsoft stack. Yeah, and if any questions, actually, I don't know if the presentations will be downloadable, but if any sections, there is an email on the first slide on me, actually. So please, if you have anything to ask, just send me an email. We can talk.
Awesome. And thank you.
Awesome.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.